first lecture where we study metabolism properly. Last lecture was an introduction, so we talked about regulated steps, what is a pathway, what's feedback inhibition, etc. Today we're going to see, the first pathway, which is glycolysis. So as the name indicates, when I say glycolysis, so we have here two word parts, glyco for sugar and lysis for breakdown. So it's a breakdown of sugar. So in glycolysis, glucose is broken down into, so glucose is 6 carbon molecule, and it's going to be broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvate. And pyruvate is a 3 carbon. Okay, so 2 times 3, 6. So we don't have here any CO2 produced. There is no loss of carbon. We're just breaking glucose into 2 pyruvates, and we are producing 2 ATP. Net, we have 2 ATP production, as we will see later. So the purpose of glycolysis is to start the breakdown of sugar. And the first step in breaking down sugar is to break it into a smaller molecule, which happens to be pyruvate. And this is what we are going to be covering today. Okay, but you need to understand that it's not only glucose, but also other nutrients will participate in later stage of metabolic fuel oxidation. So we talked about the nutrients, so we can have carbohydrates, we can have fats or triglycerides, we can have amino acids. All 3 of them eventually will be broken down to a molecule called acetyl-CoA. Okay, so whether it's carbohydrates, proteins, or fats, they will be eventually be broken down into acetyl-CoA. What is acetyl-CoA? It is activated acetic acid. So it is acetic acid to which the coenzyme A has been added to make it active. So today we're going to focus on this part only, but in later lecture we're going to talk about the future steps or the future stages of oxidation of fuel, which is the Krebs cycle here. And then later we're going to talk about the electron transport chain. But the full picture or the big picture should be clear in your mind that all metabolic fuel will give me acetyl-CoA, and acetyl-CoA will enter the Krebs cycle. From the Krebs cycle, I will have this reduced coenzyme that will enter the electron transport chain. And the ultimate goal is to give me the maximum amount of ATP from these 3 nutrients. So today we're going to focus just on this part, but it is the beginning of the story, the beginning on how we extract energy from food and how our cells stay alive by getting ATP from the nutrients that we get from the diet. Okay, so this is just lecture 19 for today, but tomorrow we're going to talk about the Krebs cycle, and then after next week we're going to talk about electron transport chain, and in later lectures, maybe some of them in Mod 2, we're going to talk about how amino acids are metabolized and how fat are metabolized. But this is the big picture. Okay, the big picture should always be clear in your mind. Don't narrow down your learning into just one lecture. Always see the big picture so that things make sense for you and you will not forget them. So as I said, we have 3 stages of metabolic fuel oxidation, and glycolysis is the first stage of the oxidation of glucose. So in glycolysis, we're just beginning to metabolize the glucose, but we have to go through other steps, like I said previously, in order to maximize the production of ATP, to get the maximum amount of ATP from this glucose. We need to know that the most important organ to maintain our blood sugar is the liver. Okay, so the liver is where excess sugar is stored. So we store excess sugar as glycogen in the liver, and we use that glycogen as a source of blood sugar whenever we are not eating, to keep us functioning when we're not eating. So we're going to rely on that glycogen stores. It can last up to 1 day, the glycogen stores. And then the way we carry sugar in the blood, it is mainly as glucose. So glucose is the main transport of blood sugar in the blood, and we store that glucose as glycogen in the liver. The most important organ in regulating our blood sugar is the liver. Now let us follow the journey of this glucose in our cells. So you have studied this with Dr. Ahmad. How does glucose enter the cells? Who can answer this question? This is included in the midterm, by the way. Is it? Carbohydrates? No, carbohydrates is not included. But you should know briefly, how does glucose enter the cells? Through what? Transporters. So what are these transporters? Are they simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion? What are they? Facilitated diffusion. Why doesn't it enter through simple diffusion? Because it has to cross the plasma membrane, right? And the plasma membrane doesn't like, it's not hydrophobic, right? It's not hydrophilic. So, and sugar is what? It's soluble molecule. So it cannot penetrate the plasma membrane, and the plasma membrane also, you know, has some permeability issues. So we need these transporters, right? So these transporters, we call them glucose transporters or GLUT. So these GLUT transporters, they are present in the membrane of different cells, and they are going to facilitate the diffusion of glucose. We have specific transporters for specific tissues. So for most tissues, we have what we call GLUT1, and they are responsible for the basal uptake of glucose. In the liver and the pancreas and the intestine, we have GLUT2, and they have very high capacity of glucose uptake. So they have, you know, they are very good at uptaking glucose, because this is where we're going to store the glucose in the liver. GLUT3 for the brain, they are responsible for the neuronal uptake of glucose. And GLUT4, they are quite unique. They are present in the muscle, in the fat tissues, and the heart. But what makes them different, the GLUT4, from the other transporters? They depend on insulin. Okay, so GLUT4 are the only transporters which are dependent on insulin. What does this mean if we have a transporter that is dependent on insulin? Yes? Can you remove the mask, sir? Excellent. So they will only work if we have insulin. So if insulin level go up, then these glucose transporters will work. So when is insulin released? When we are hungry or when we are eating? Yes, so after a carbohydrate-rich meal, insulin will be released, and these transporters will work. In this way, we can only have glucose entering the muscle and the fat tissue in the fed state when we are eating. And if we are fasting, these tissues, muscles and adipose tissue, they will not depend on glucose for energy resource. They will depend on fats and other sources of energy at the time of fasting. Okay, so this is why it's important to know that GLUT4 transporters, they are dependent on insulin. And that's very important when we talk about diabetes later. So a very important point to remember that GLUT4, they are responsible for the entry of glucose in the muscle and the adipose tissue, and they work only in the presence of insulin. What does it mean they work only in the presence of insulin? So these transporters or carriers, they are present inside the cell, and only when insulin binds to its receptor, then these transporters are going to go and fuse with the plasma membrane. Okay, so that's why we need insulin, because these transporters will not go to the surface of the plasma membrane until insulin binds to the receptor here at the plasma membrane. And when is insulin released? After a carbohydrate-rich meal. Okay, so we talked about the 3 steps in glucose oxidation. We talked that glycolysis is the first step, and then it is followed by the Krebs cycle, and the last part is the oxidative phosphorylation. And today we're going to focus on glycolysis. So we start with glucose, we end up with 2 pyruvate, and we are going to produce 2 ATP, 2 NADH. This is the net or the summary of glycolysis. And where does glycolysis occur? As we can see here, it's happening where? In the cytoplasm. This is very important because glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. It means that it's going to be the only source of energy for the cells that don't have a mitochondria. So red blood cells, for instance, they don't have a mitochondria. So all of this in purple here will not happen in red blood cells. So the only source of ATP is going to be from glycolysis because red blood cells don't have the Krebs cycle, they don't have electron transport chains, so they are deprived from all these metabolic pathways. They only depend on glycolysis for the generation of ATP. Okay, so this is the overview of glycolysis. So how many steps we have in glycolysis? We have 10 steps. Do we need to know all of them? We need to know that we start with the glucose, we end with pyruvate. We have 10 steps. Out of them, 3 are irreversible. So if you look at the arrow here, you can see that reaction 1, reaction 3, and reaction 10, they are the irreversible steps. They happen in one direction, and they are going to be therefore the regulated steps. So we're going to study the regulation of these 3 steps, and we're going to study them in detail, these 3 reactions, but you should know what happened to glucose. So you should know that you should be familiar with the other steps, and especially if there is something unique about them. Like for instance, we have 2 steps that generate ATP, because there are only 3 reactions in biochemistry where ATP is generated by what we call substrate level phosphorylation. So definitely you should know these steps here. And you should know, for instance, that 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate is generated here. And this is the compound from which 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate is generated. And we've learned about 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate before. It is the molecule that is important for the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So the answer to the question, do we need to know all the 10? Is no, you don't need to know all the 10 in details. You should know the details about the 3 regulated steps and the details about the reactions, which I'm gonna mention later in the lecture. But you should be familiar with what happened to glucose. So let's say glucose, this is reaction 1 that we study in detail, but after reaction 1, you should be, at least you should comprehend that glucose 6-phosphate is changed into fructose 6-phosphate. The name of the enzyme is not important, but you should really be able to understand the logic of these 10 reactions. Okay, so let's start with reaction 1. Reaction 1 is catalyzed by the enzyme hexokinase. Anyone had a question here? Okay. So the enzyme hexokinase, as the name indicates, kinase, it's going to add a phosphate group to the hexose. Which hexose are we talking about? Glucose. Okay, so reaction 1 will convert the glucose into glucose 6-phosphate. So we are adding phosphate to carbon number 6 in glucose. This reaction is one of the 3 irreversible reactions, as I said. It is the first step in glucose metabolism. So here I'm saying it's the first step in glucose metabolism, not only the first step in glycolysis, because this reaction is not only used in glycolysis, but it's also used in other pathways, such as you will see it glycogen synthesis, you will see it in the pentose phosphate pathway. So this is not unique for glycolysis. This reaction is very important because once we add the phosphate to glucose, it's the way of trapping the glucose inside the cell. Okay, so we always see that question in the midterms, in the TPL, in the final. What is the purpose of phosphorylating glucose? To trap it inside the cell. And this makes sense because, first of all, phosphorylated glucose will not be able to leave through the transporters. It won't be able to exit the cell once it's phosphorylated because the transporters will only work with free glucose, not with phosphorylated glucose. And we need to invest in energy because we are using here ATP to phosphorylate glucose. Although the aim of glycolysis is to generate energy, still we had to invest in some energy because phosphorylated glucose is essential to keep that glucose locked inside the cell. We have the hexokinase, which is present in most tissues, but we have a specific type of hexokinase which is unique for the liver and the pancreas, and this is called the glucokinase. So for the liver and the pancreas, the enzyme hexokinase is a specific form that we call glucokinase, and it has a slightly different kinetics compared to the hexokinase, which is present in all other tissues. And we're going to talk about this in detail. The hexokinase enzyme is feedback inhibited by glucose 6-phosphate. What does this mean? If we have accumulation of glucose 6-phosphate inside the cell, this high amount of glucose 6-phosphate is going to feedback inhibit to stop the enzyme hexokinase working because we don't want to keep accumulating phosphorylated glucose inside the cell. And this is the reaction. So we start with glucose, we end up with glucose 6-phosphate. So there is a phosphate here on carbon number 6. The enzyme is hexokinase, and we need ATP. And this reaction is feedback inhibited by the end product of the reaction. Okay, so as I said, in the liver and the pancreas, we have a glucokinase which works differently from the hexokinase. Why we need a different enzyme or slightly different enzyme, although it's going to do the same thing. It's going to phosphorylate the glucose and to trap it inside the cell. The kinetics are slightly different because, remember, the liver doesn't work to, doesn't want glucose inside it in order to generate energy. The liver wants glucose inside it to make glycogen for storage. So first of all, we shouldn't have the feedback inhibition. And second of all, it should only work when we have too much blood sugar. So the glucokinase will work only when you have too much blood sugar. This is when we want to draw that sugar in the liver to reduce the hyperglycemia and to store that glucose in the liver to be used later when we are hungry. That's why the mechanics or the kinetics of the glucokinase are different. Okay, so why glucokinase has different kinetics? Because the liver doesn't use glucose as fuel. We need that glucokinase to phosphorylate the glucose to trap it in the liver to prevent hyperglycemia. And this is going to be induced by insulin. So only after a carbohydrate-rich meal, the insulin will go up and it's going to activate the glucokinase. And there is no feedback inhibition, as I said, because we don't want to stop storing that glucose in the liver. And in the beta cells of the pancreas, we share the same enzyme, the glucokinase, because the glucokinase in the pancreas work as a sensor of blood glucose. So once blood glucose go up, the glucokinase will sense that blood sugar going up and it's going to release insulin accordingly. And it is important to know about this glucokinase in the pancreas because it has a mutation in a very rare genetic disease called MODY. What does MODY stand for? Maturity onset diabetes of the young. Type 2, this is the common type, but it is very rare genetic disease. And it's caused by a mutation in the glucokinase gene. As a result, the pancreas doesn't secrete insulin properly and the patient will suffer from hyperglycemia. But I repeat, this is a very rare genetic disorder. Doesn't have to do with type 2 diabetes. It is a genetic disorder that is very rare, in a very rare form. Let us review the kinetics of the two enzymes. So we said hexokinase in almost all cells, glucokinase for the liver and the pancreas. How do they work? How are the kinetics? So the hexokinase have a very high affinity for glucose. So the minute there is any glucose in the blood, most of our cells are going to trap that glucose inside these cells because they need it for their energy, they need it for their survival. But for the liver and the pancreas, it has very low affinity. Very low affinity because we don't want to reduce the blood sugar unless we have too much blood sugar. Then we need to trap that sugar in the liver in order to reduce the hyperglycemia or to correct the hyperglycemia. Okay, so this is the explanation why it has high affinity in most tissues, the hexokinase, because we need to efficiently metabolize the blood sugar. And the one in the liver, it's only when we have too much blood sugar, so the blood sugar goes up and it reaches the liver and it's going in a very high concentration. This is where it's going to be trapped in the liver cells. Vmax, the hexokinase has a low Vmax. You study this in MOL2, you will be able to understand them more properly, but for the time being, Vmax, it has to do with the velocity. So the hexokinase works slowly, has a low Vmax. Why it does work slowly? Because we don't want to overwhelm the cells. We don't want to phosphorylate more sugar than the cell can use. But with the glucokinase, it has a very high velocity because we want to effectively remove the glucose from the blood sugar in order to correct hyperglycemia that occur after we eat. Okay, so that's why it needs to work fast. We don't want that blood sugar, that sugar to sit in the blood for a long time. Remember last time I said the sugar in the blood, if it stays there for a long time, it's toxic. So we want to restore homeostasis. We don't want to keep that sugar in the blood. We want to trap it in the liver. That's why the glucokinase has to work very fast. I mentioned before that the hexokinase is feedback inhibited by the product. Here we don't have feedback inhibition, but we have activation by insulin. It's hormonally controlled because that's the purpose of this glucokinase, to reduce the blood sugar, and that's the purpose of insulin. Okay, so we talked about reaction 1 in detail, the hexokinase/glucokinase story. The second step, you are not required to know the enzyme, but you should know that glucose 6-phosphate will be changed into fructose 6-phosphate, which is an isomer of glucose. And then we have reaction 3, which is the most important reaction in glycolysis. It is catalyzed by the most important enzyme for glycolysis, which is PFK1 or phosphofructokinase 1. What does this enzyme do? It's going to add the second phosphate, this time to fructose 6-phosphate. Remember, we added the first phosphate with hexokinase. We have used one ATP. Now we're going to use the second ATP to add the second phosphate, this time on carbon number 1 of fructose. We don't have glucose anymore because we have isomerized, we changed from glucose to fructose. So this reaction, PFK1, is going to add the second phosphate, and we have the product fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Okay, if you're not listening, at least please don't talk. I can see many, or I can hear many of you talking. Please, at least don't disturb your friends. So, fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. What does bisphosphate mean? Bis means 2. So we say bi or bis or di. It means 2. We have 2 phosphate group on the fructose. This is a very high energy compound because it has 2 phosphate bonds here, very high in energy, and we're going to break those bonds later one by one, and this is where we are going to generate the ATP. So the enzyme phosphofructokinase 1, let's talk about it in detail. So this is reaction 3. As you can see, this step is highly regulated. Okay, we have 2 molecules that activate and 2 molecules that inhibit. So it is irreversible, of course. We learned last time that regulated steps have to be irreversible. It is the most important control point. It is both the committed step, because this is going to be a unique step for glycolysis. Once we go down this route, we cannot go back and do something else. It's the committed step for glycolysis. And it is the reaction with the lowest enzyme, the enzyme with the lowest activity. That's why we call it the rate limiting step. Okay, so reaction 3 is the most important step in glycolysis. It is highly regulated, it is the committed, and it is the rate limiting step. So if you want to control glycolysis, overall you have to make sure you control the rate of the enzyme PFK1. Okay, so we learned last time that the aim of oxidative pathway is to generate energy, right? So glycolysis is an oxidative pathway, it's a catabolic pathway. The aim of glycolysis is to break down glucose to pyruvate and to generate ATP. And all these pathways where the purpose is to generate ATP, they are regulated by the amount of energy. And we learned last time that if we have accumulation of ATP, so this is going to inhibit this pathway. And what is the opposite of having too much ATP? Is to have too much of what? AMP or ADP. Okay, so you have to remember this ratio. If ATP levels are high, it means that the ADP and the AMP are low. And if ATP is going to, ATP here, if it's going to accumulate, it's going to inhibit this catalytic pathway because we don't want more energy, so we're going to inhibit. So if ATP inhibit, what will AMP do? It will activate, because if AMP is accumulating, it means that the cell is poor in energy. Okay, so ATP accumulation signal, high energy status of the cell, AMP accumulation signal, low energy of the cell, and they're always going to have opposing effect. So this is the kind of things that you should understand rather than remembering bluntly. So if you just remember ATP activate, AMP inhibit, you will forget it by the time you leave this lecture. But if you try to understand or comprehend that ATP is the purpose of this pathway. We are breaking down glucose to generate ATP. And if we have too much ATP inside the cell, this will act as a feedback inhibitor. So ATP will inhibit the most important step of this pathway, which is the reaction 3. And ATP works in opposite way as AMP, or AMP and ATP have opposite effect. So if ATP is going to inhibit, AMP will what? AMP will activate. Okay, so this is the kind of logic you should always have when you're studying or when you're revising. Try to have things making sense. If things don't make sense, you will quickly forget them and you will get confused in the exam. Okay, so ATP inhibits, AMP activate, the most important step of glycolysis. What about citrate or citric acid? Citric acid is the first product of the second stage in oxidation, which is the Krebs cycle. So when citric acid accumulates, it means there's something wrong with the Krebs cycle. And it means that we cannot proceed down, the very end of cellular oxidation. That's why accumulation of citric acid is going to inhibit glycolysis. Fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is a slightly complicated story, and we explain it in the future slides, but fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is going to be an activator of PFK1. It's very important to remember that point, because also it is a regulatory molecule for gluconeogenesis that you're going to study with Dr. Ahmed next week. Okay, so this is how it is activated, but this molecule, fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, is only present in the liver because the enzyme needed to make this molecule is in the liver, okay? This molecule, fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, is the most important regulatory molecule in the liver. So it can override any inhibition in the liver cells. So let's say we have too much ATP or too much citric acid in the liver. Still, if we have too much fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, it can override the inhibition by ATP. And this is again important for the liver in order to control the blood sugar. Okay, so we said fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is very important molecule, but where is this molecule coming from? So here we have phosphofructokinase 1 or PFK1. This is the action 3. But there is another enzyme which is PFK2, which is present in the liver. Okay, so insulin will activate PFK2 in the liver. And this PFK2 or phosphofructokinase 2 is going to convert small amount of fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 2,6-bisphosphate. So this is now the molecule that is going to regulate glycolysis. Okay, this molecule will activate PFK1, therefore activating glycolysis. And at the same time, it's going to inhibit an important regulatory enzyme in gluconeogenesis. So you might not be able to understand this fully now, but remember that this molecule, fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, has a dual effect. It controls both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. It's important to have one molecule controlling both because these two pathways are opposite. You don't want glycolysis and gluconeogenesis to happen at the same time. Therefore, when you switch on glycolysis, you have to switch off gluconeogenesis. Okay, and you will understand this better when you study gluconeogenesis. I talked about insulin. So insulin is secreted by our body after a carbohydrate-rich meal, and its job is to reduce the blood sugar. But insulin has an opposing hormone, which is glucagon. Glucagon has the opposing effect. So glucagon is secreted also by the pancreas, but when we are fasting. So when your blood sugar goes down, the pancreas will secrete glucagon. And what is the job of the glucagon? To raise the blood sugar. So insulin and glucagon have always opposing effect. So if insulin activates the enzyme, glucagon will inhibit, and vice versa. So insulin activates PFK2, therefore automatically glucagon will inhibit PFK2. Okay, so in the time of fasting, glucagon is secreted, it will inhibit PFK2, it will lower this 2,6-bisphosphate, and therefore it will inhibit PFK1. So in the time of hunger, glycolysis will be switched off by glucagon. And this is illustrated here. So you will study this in greater details in future lectures, and you'll be able to understand the details of this regulation later. But for now, remember that after carbohydrate-rich meal, the pancreas will secrete insulin. Insulin is going to activate PFK2, and PFK2 is going to secrete this regulatory molecule, fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, and this regulatory molecule is going to activate glycolysis, but at the same time, it's going to inhibit gluconeogenesis, and you will learn this with Dr. Ahmed later on. Okay, so far we have talked about reaction 1, hexokinase, and we said how hexokinase and glucokinase, they do the same job, but they have different kinetics. We talked about PFK1, which is the most important enzyme in glycolysis, and how it is regulated by many molecules. The most important of them is the fructose 2,6-bisphosphate in the liver. And now let us follow the pathway that this glucose has, is taking down in glycolysis. So we said glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate. Now we have a fructose with 2-phosphate. What will happen next? We are going to break down that fructose 1,6-bisphosphate into 2 3-carbon molecules. You don't need to know their names. And they're going to isomerize, and we end up with 1 3-carbon molecule, which is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is now going to gain another phosphate, but this time not from ATP, from inorganic phosphate, and we will end up with 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. There is something important that you should remember about this step. Don't worry about the name of the enzyme or the regulation. It's not a regulated step, but here we are producing an ADH. Okay, so we start with NAD+, which is the oxidized form of the coenzyme NAD, and we end up with the reduced form. This is very important in glycolysis because for glycolysis to continue to happen, you need a constant supply of the NAD+. If you don't have enough NAD+, then glycolysis will stop. And this is very important in cells that don't have mitochondria because the reduced coenzyme NADH is going to be oxidized in the mitochondria. So if you don't have a mitochondria, how you are going to replenish this NAD+, you have to find a reaction that generates NAD+, and this is what we are going to talk about later. Okay, so just remember that here, somewhere between reaction 3 and 10, there is one reaction where glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is changed to 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, and this reaction requires NAD+, the oxidized form of the coenzyme NAD. Next, this 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, which is the cousin, by the way, of 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So from this 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, we can make the 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate, which is the important molecule for the regulation of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, and we'll come back to this later. This molecule, the 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, is going to lose one phosphate, and this time we are going to generate the first ATP. This is called substrate level phosphorylation. What do we mean by substrate level phosphorylation? There are 3 reactions in biochemistry where we have substrate level phosphorylation. It means that we are going to break a high energy bond in a substrate in order to generate ATP. So this is the first reaction in biochemistry where we have substrate level phosphorylation. This is a very high energy compound, the 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. We're going to break that bond and we're going to generate ATP. The name of the enzyme, don't worry about it. Then we have 3-phosphoglycerate, then we have 2-phosphoglycerate, and then we have an enolase enzyme. Why I'm mentioning now enolase? I'm mentioning the name of the enzyme enolase because it's the enzyme that is inhibited by the fluoride that is present in the toothpaste. Okay, so the enolase is inhibited by fluoride in the toothpaste, and this is one of the mechanisms why using fluoride toothpaste help maintaining healthy teeth, because by inhibiting the enolase, you are inhibiting here the accumulation of the acidic product that are formed down the road here, which is lactic acid will be formed here somewhere down after glycolysis. So if you inhibit enolase, you are preventing the accumulation of lactic acid, which is the reason behind the tooth decay. Okay, so just remember enolase is inhibited by fluoride in the toothpaste. Next, we have the last reaction, reaction 10. Again, a very high energy compound, PEP or phosphoenol pyruvate. So we have 2 very high energy compounds, and they are the one responsible for the substrate level phosphorylation. So you should remember 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate and phosphoenol pyruvate, they are the 2 high energy compounds. They are the 2 responsible for the phosphate, for the substrate level phosphorylation. So we are generating the second ATP here. The enzyme is pyruvate kinase, and you can see the arrow going in one direction, which means that this is again irreversible. So this is the third and the last irreversible step in glycolysis, where you generate the end product pyruvate. The enzyme is very important because there is inherited deficiency. Besides the fact that it's regulated, it is some patients are born with a mutation in pyruvate kinase and they suffer from the disease, which results in anemia, some sort of anemia, and we will study this later. For now, remember 3 reactions that are highly regulated: the hexokinase, the phosphofructokinase, the pyruvate kinase. We need an NAD+ in the oxidized form. There are 2 steps that generate ATP by substrate level phosphorylation, and we have a total of 10 steps in glycolysis. Okay, so this is what I've just mentioned here, the formation of 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. I mentioned that this reaction requires the oxidized form of NAD+. And if you have a problem and you cannot supply this NAD+, then the glycolysis will stop. But in the presence of oxygen, or if glycolysis is aerobic, what will happen? How we are going to supply this NAD+ by the electron transport chain. If there is no oxygen or no mitochondria, then we have to use another reaction to resupply this NAD+, and we'll see that later. Okay, we talked about the substrate level phosphorylation. We said the first ATP is formed from 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. This is a very high energy compound. So we talked about this step here before, the first substrate level phosphorylation. And we said we go down the way here until we reach PEP. I mentioned enolase before. I said enolase is needed to form PEP, and enolase is present or is inhibited by the fluoride. Reaction 10, this is where we're going to stop we are going to stop at this reaction and talk about its regulation. So reaction 10 is regulated by pyruvate kinase, or it is catalyzed by pyruvate kinase. So we go from phosphoenol pyruvate. So it is pyruvate with a phosphate group to get the final product, which is pyruvate. So this is the second substrate level phosphorylation, as I said before, and it's activated by fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. This is an example of feed-forward activation. So the product of reaction 3 is an activator of reaction 10. Okay, so this is a feed-forward activation. Pyruvate kinase is activated by the product of reaction 3. I mentioned the deficiency. So this is a rare genetic disorder where we have a deficiency in the enzyme pyruvate kinase, especially in the isoform that is present in red blood cell. This will result in a reduction in the level of ATP. Therefore, we cannot maintain the transporters, the ion transporters. So what will happen to red blood cells? They will swell and die. So the patient will have what we call hemolytic anemia. We will study this disease in detail in the heme block in the second semester. You will see that the red blood cells will look like this. So they are lysed red blood cells. You can see from the wrinkly membrane, they've been lysed, but they don't have these black dots inside. So these black dots inside, they are called Heinz body, and you'll study them in future lectures. So Heinz bodies, they are present in a specific type of hemolytic anemia. You study this with Dr. Raja and the pentose phosphate pathway. So for now, remember that if pyruvate kinase, the enzyme in reaction 10 is deficient, you have this very rare genetic disorder that will result in the lysis of the red blood cells, no Heinz bodies. Another problem with the pyruvate kinase deficiency that you will have accumulation. Okay, so this is glycolysis. You should get pyruvate here. If you have deficiency of this enzyme, what will happen? All the intermediates of glycolysis will accumulate, so everything will back off. So you start having accumulation of all the other intermediates, including 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. And once you have too much 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, it's going to be changed into its cousin, which is the 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate will go up. As a result, what will happen to the oxygen dissociation curve? It will shift to the right. Okay, so in pyruvate kinase deficiency, you will have a higher level of 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So there is a shift to the right. As a result, there is a reduction in oxygen affinity of hemoglobin. So again, you're going to revisit this in the heme block next semester, but you just, for this course, try to link things together. Pyruvate kinase is reaction 10 in glycolysis. Okay, we mentioned about the regulated steps. So we have reaction 1, 3, and 10. They are highly regulated We talked about hexokinase. We said it is regulated by the end product, which is glucose 6-phosphate, but also in the liver, the glucokinase is regulated by insulin. Insulin will activate glucokinase in the liver. The action 3, we said it is highly regulated, so we have the energy level that is inhibiting. If we have too much energy, it will inhibit. If we have a low energy level, it will activate. Citric acid, the product of the Krebs cycle, if it accumulates, it's going to inhibit. And this regulatory molecule, it will switch on glycolysis and switch off gluconeogenesis, as you will see later in future lectures. What about pyruvate kinase? It's also regulated by hormone, but also regulated. The one hormone is going to be insulin, so insulin will activate the kinase, and ATP, of course, the end product is going to inhibit the pyruvate kinase. So ATP is actually an inhibitor of the 3 regulated enzymes, the pyruvate kinase, the phosphofructokinase 1, and the hexokinase, because the aim of this pathway is to generate ATP. Okay, so this is the regulation by hormones. So ATP, I said it's going to inhibit the 3 enzymes, and the hormone is going to be insulin. So insulin is going to activate, as I said, after carbohydrate-rich meal, the level of blood sugar will go up. As a result, insulin will go up, and insulin will try to reduce the blood sugar. One way to reduce the blood sugar is to break that glucose. So breaking the glucose, we need to activate. So insulin will activate the 3 regulated steps, going to activate glucokinase in the liver, PFK1, and pyruvate kinase. If insulin activates, what will glucagon do? It will inhibit. Always remember that these 2 have opposing effect. Insulin has the opposite effect of glucagon. Okay, so this is the net product. So at the end, we produce 2 ATP. How come 2 ATP? At the beginning, we have invested. So we have to borrow 2 ATP because there were 2 reactions that required ATP. But at the end, everything is timed by 2. So each step here is timed by 2, if you remember. So starting here, everything is multiplied by 2 because we have 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So it means we are going to produce here 2 and here 2 ATP. So there are a total of 4 ATP produced. So 4 ATP produced minus the 2 ATP that we have invested. So 4 minus 2, the net is going to be 2. Okay, so the net production is 2 ATP, 2 and ADH. Well, the discussion keeps on going and they are laughing also. Yeah, Auladi, please. Okay, so the regulation, where were we? Yes. So this is the net, 2 ADP, 2 and ADH, because everything is multiplied by 2 after the 3-phosphoglycerate step. Okay, the fate of pyruvate. What will happen next after glycolysis? Glycolysis is just the beginning of the story. We haven't extracted much energy. We just produced 2 ATP and we didn't break those carbon down. So what will happen with those 3 carbon molecules? So pyruvate is going to be converted to a 2 carbon molecule, acetyl-CoA, which is going to enter the Krebs cycle only in cells that have mitochondria or cells that have enough energy, enough oxygen. So we need to have enough oxygen. We need to have a mitochondria to continue the cellular respiration. What about cells that don't have mitochondria? They will convert this pyruvate into lactate. And in other organisms, such as bacteria or yeast, the pyruvate is going to be converted to ethanol, and this is called fermentation. So in the absence of oxygen, in the absence of fermentation, in the absence of mitochondria, pyruvate will fermentate into ethanol in bacteria and yeast, or in lactate in human. So lactate is produced under anaerobic condition. What do we mean by anaerobic? There is no oxygen. So remember, I told you we need a continuous supply of NAD+ in order to keep glycolysis going. So if we don't have a mitochondria to generate the NAD+, what will be the source of this NAD+? This reaction. So pyruvate will be converted to lactate or lactic acid. The enzyme is very important, lactate dehydrogenase, and this is where we are going to regenerate the NAD+ to keep glycolysis going. There is a problem with this step. Lactate is an acid, and if we have too much of this lactate, then we have what we call lactic acidosis, and acid will kill the cells. So yes, it is a solution. It's a solution to try to solve an emergency inside the cell, but we cannot rely on this for a long time because too much lactate will lead to acidosis, and acidosis can also kill the cell. So when do we switch to anaerobic glycolysis, or when is it useful? So it is useful in the red blood cells because they don't have mitochondria, so they depend on this step to keep glycolysis going. Also, our muscles under heavy exercise, when we have to produce too much ATP for the cells to contract, the oxygen supply might be a limiting factor, so especially if someone is not breathing well or they don't have enough time to breathe very well, then the muscle will turn the glucose into lactic acid. So again, we have anaerobic glycolysis. That's why, when you're exercising, they always tell you, breathe well and don't, make sure you are breathing constantly, because if you don't breathe properly, then lactic acid will be produced so fast and you will be tired so quickly. Ischemic tissues, so tissues who have been deprived of oxygen. So let's say if someone is having a heart attack and the blood circulation is stopped, or someone has a problem with the blood pressure, or someone is having severe hemorrhage, everything that, anything that is disrupt the supply of blood. Supply of blood means supply of oxygen to the tissue. This will lead to, the tissue switching to anaerobic glycolysis. Again, it's an emergency situation. We are trying to buy time by doing the lactate because we need to have ATP, otherwise the cells will die. But again, too much lactate will produce too much acid that will kill the cell. So all these conditions can result in lactic acidosis. It's a long list. So too much physical activity, lung disease, in addition to like what I mentioned before, the myocardial infarction or heart attack, or if someone is at high altitude for a long time, someone is drowning, severe anemia, someone is poisoned, or someone with sickle cell crisis. So all these conditions can lead to lactic acidosis, which, if it stays for a long time, it can be dangerous to life. Okay, so I explained this, why we need this step, because we need the NAD+ to be regenerated. If we don't have oxygen or we don't have a mitochondria, we will not have NAD+, and we need the NAD+ to keep the glycolysis happening. That's why this enzyme is very important, lactate dehydrogenase, or LDH. Okay, so this was the last slide. Okay, so make sure you understand this step very well, because it's related to lots of clinical scenario. And remember that this last step is here. So pyruvate is changed to lactate in the absence of oxygen or absence of mitochondria. Tomorrow we're going to talk about this, part of the story. So pyruvate being changed to acetyl-CoA and entering the Krebs